I tell you what I am concerned about, and that is if Congress and the judiciary doesn't do something soon about the FBI and the Justice Department, we are on our way to becoming a fascist nation and a police state. Our founding fathers never intended us to have a national police force who could just decide to go after people they didn't like. And that's what RICO and mail fraud and some of these other statutes have been used for. Something's got to be done to change that around, or we will not be a free people much longer.
So anyway, here's another one by Mike Cox. He's talking about how me and Maddox have quit talking to the press. Well, because they were twisting our words so much.
Yeah.
The sudden silence apparently is the outcome of a telephone discussion between Feazell and the Texas Attorney General's office. Said, but Maddox was not in Waco Friday. And this is May 4th. So by May, Maddox's visits were getting a little less frequent.
Right.
Then he talks about Bob Larson, the crazy radio preacher.
Right.
And Lucas said he had been compelled by McLennan County officials to recant his many confessions to slayings.
Mm.
Yeah.
Your fault, Vic. You did this. You made him.
Yeah, we made him. We compelled him. You know, and then they go and they bring Lucas down to that San Antonio grand jury, accusing me, Jim Maddox, of violating his civil rights.
Right.
Then we looked at the list that Ron Boyder looked at in the Ramada Inn with Charles Duncan. Him and Bill Johnston showed it. You can see when you read that list, and we went over this a couple of weeks ago, every one of those items is going after somebody, trying to get something on someone who is involved in the Lucas investigation. Truman Simons, me, Jack Harwell, Dan Weinberg, and even Judge George Allen.
Right.
All those names brought up in that Ramada Inn meeting. Yeah. The only witnesses to testify before the grand jury Friday were the parents of an 18-year-old woman thought to have been the first person Lucas killed after his release from prison in Michigan. Well, you know who that was. You know who those witnesses were.
We do. Bob and Joyce Lemons, right?
Bob and Joyce Lemons. Yeah. So he might say the only witnesses to testify, but they took the whole day. The whole day. Bob and Joyce Lemons of Gainesville lived in Lubbock when their daughter, Deborah Sue Williamson, was found stabbed to death at her residence in Lubbock. Lucas had been released from prison 2 days earlier. So he's released from prison in Michigan and uses his 2 days to, I think I'll drive to Lubbock and kill me somebody. No, I don't think so. We know he was on his way back home.
Right.
Took that bus home, and he spent the night with Betty Crawford, his then wife.
And would you state your name, please?
Betty and Crawford.
Okay.
We've got Betty Crawford on video telling about that. And some of that video was taken by Bob Lemons.
Right.
Bob Lemons said he and his wife had spent $30,000. That was basically their life savings back in the 80s. Had spent $30,000 investigating the slaying of their daughter and had twice been to Maryland to talk to the relatives of Lucas.
Right.
The relatives have said Lucas went to Maryland after his release.
How did you meet Henry after he got out of prison?
Well, his sister called me, which is no great aunt, and said he was out.
Okay.
And things, and said that she was bringing him home and everything he'd done his time. And I never thought too much more about it, you know. She said he was, so as far as I know, when he come home, they'd had a party for him, went to Pennsylvania, to stay with his niece.
He came home here to
Fort Deposit.
Fort Deposit, Maryland first, and then he went to Pennsylvania.
To stay with his niece.
Yep.
So, and that's indisputable. I mean, we've got the documents, we've got the interviews with his family members, and he didn't do it. And Bob and Joyce were such great witnesses. They were strong allies of mine when the press and when Colonel Jim Adams would start attacking me. Bob would call his own press conferences, man. He was a tough little guy. He was a banny rooster, man. And I mean, he could get, you wind him up and he could get to going and he could give a talk. He really could. And he knew the facts of the case of the killing of his stepdaughter, Deborah Sue, really, really well. And Joyce was such a sweetheart. And if you haven't seen The Confession Killer, go watch it. Joyce is in that. Joyce died before she got to see The Confession Killer because I still don't know what took them so damn long to edit it. I mean, they completed the shooting a long time. I mean, they edited this thing longer than Gone with the Wind, I think.
Huh?
You know, and I had an idea.
What's that?
They only made 5 episodes. They haven't had enough story and enough extra video to do 5 or 10 more episodes.
Yeah.
They're supposed to do 10 to begin with, but then Rob Kenner got the job, you know, doing the documentary on Stan Lee.
Other folks.
And he had already had to give up the documentary on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And he wanted to get this thing over with, and they got it over with. Well, here's what I'm thinking.
What do you propose, Mr. Feazell?
What's Netflix going to do for content? Say, if this quarantine and this social distancing drags on, where you have to wear a mask and everything. What if it drags on for a year? What if it drags on for 2 years?
Yeah.
I mean, how are they going to produce new content? They can't. It's either going to have to be animated, totally CGI, or they got to go back to some of their old archival footage and start making new episodes from that. And that's what I wish they'd do. You know, I was in it episode 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Right.
But if you add up all my time, how long am I talking? Less than an hour, maybe less than 40 minutes. They interviewed me for 5 days, man.
Yeah, dude.
They have the entire story from start to finish, from me first hearing about Lucas all the way through the trial, the indictment, the criminal trial, the not guilty verdict, the civil case, and then winning the civil case.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And the civil case wasn't tried until 1991. And that's the next article I want to talk about. Even though we're jumping to 91, we're still talking about April 1985.
Right. Investigator contradicts Duncan's testimony.
Yeah. And you know who that's a picture of?
Who's that?
That is Ron Boyder, man.
Oh, we've talked about him a lot.
That's the guy we've been talking about. And man, I tell you, one thing he was really good at was avoiding the cameras. Netflix tried so hard to find video of Ron Boyder.
Yeah.
But whenever there was a camera around, he would duck his face. He'd nearly put his face under his arm, or he'd be through a door, or he'd turn his back. They finally, after going through everything I had, found maybe 2 or 3 seconds of Ron Boyder that they could show. Yeah. So he was an intelligence officer with DPS. He had been trained. He knew his stuff. But that doesn't mean he was honest. However, for some strange reason, there must have been backup documents that would have gotten him in trouble. Otherwise, he told the truth on something when he testified in the Belo case in 1991 when I sued Channel 8.
Right.
Charles Duncan had come on TV and said that the FBI is investigating Vic Feazell and a handful of lawyers over bribes being paid to dismiss DWI cases.
Right.
The FBI, since April, since June, since January. You know, he kept backing it up.
Right.
The FBI weren't involved at all. Not at all. Not at all. We're going to find out from Ron Boyder's own mouth when the investigation of me started, and Gary Richardson got it out of him on the witness stand. There's a police investigator on Wednesday denied telling former Dallas television reporter Charles Duncan in April '85 that the FBI had been investigating Vic Feazell since the fall of '84. You see, they kept trying to back up their investigation of me. Jim
Right.
Adams did, and Prince did, and all those guys. Oh, no, we were looking at Vic way before he ever looked at Lucas. No, bullshit. They weren't. They weren't. As I've said before, not a memo, not a phone message, not a voucher, nothing. And these guys document everything. I told you they even documented when they saw me and John Ben Sutter going into McDonald's for breakfast one morning. And that's the only thing in that file I'm ashamed of.
Something's up.
Yeah, and I'm kind of ashamed of that because I won't go to a McDonald's anymore.
McDonald's yesterday.
I can't do that. I just can't do it. They're not the same quality that they were. I remember McDonald's when their sign used to say over 1 million sold.
I remember that. Yeah.
1 million. Now they sell what, 1 million an hour? Ronald E. Boyer, a lead public Department of Public Safety investigator, disputed testimony from Duncan, a former investigative reporter for Channel 8. Duncan wrapped up 10 days of testimony. Now, I got to go back here and apologize to Gary Richardson. Gary Richardson said, I kept Duncan on the stand for 10 days. I said, no, you didn't. He was on the stand for 5 days. He said, no, it's 10 days, Vic. I said, no, it's 5 days. Well, I guess time just flies when you're having fun because it seemed like 5 days to me. But Gary actually kept Duncan on the witness stand for 10 days.
So crazy.
Yeah. We deposed him for 5 or 6 and then kept him on the witness stand for 10 days.
God.
Ron Border was only our second witness. I tell you how Gary and I try cases similar. I kind of learned from Gary. Well, I learned from Matt Dawson at Baylor Law School. Oh, he was just fabulous. He was my practice court professor. But then Gary Richardson taught me some strategy things like just go into the dragon's nest first. Grab him by the throat and slap him around a little. And that's what we did. And we do that with every case we have. We usually call a string of bad guys first before we even try to tell our story. You know, we'll bring it out through them. Yeah. So we called Duncan first, and he was on the stand for 10 days. And then we called Ron Border. Duncan led off his series on WFAA saying the FBI was investigating Feazell and several local attorneys who charged high fees to clients whose cases got dismissed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's just not true. And we know that's not true. Duncan's led off his series saying the FBI was investigating Feazell. Well, we know the series started in May.
Right.
The FBI still wasn't involved in May. Still not. The first time the FBI got there was when old Bob Zane showed up on Ron Border's arm. They were like the Bopsy twins. They went everywhere together. We call them Frick and Frack.
That's funny.
So he absolutely lied right off the bat by saying the FBI had been investigating me since '84. They still weren't investigating me when he aired this.
Wow.
And he defended his this is funny. Duncan's and Belo's attorneys, Tom Leatherberry and John McElhaney. And we call them the Deputy Dog Twins because they were just so boring.
Oh, no.
So boring. They said the Duncan series was nothing more than an accurate, fair reporting on the actions of a controversial public figure who wants to kill the messenger. Saying I wanted to kill the messenger. Now, you know, people use that phrase all the time, killing the messenger, like you're just killing the guy that brought you the note. Right. No, that's not where that phrase came from. That phrase comes from the Bible.
Right.
When King Saul, you know, he had been hunting David, trying to kill David before David was king. And he was in a battle and got wounded. And this other guy sees him there wounded and that the battle is lost. And he finishes Saul off. He kills Saul himself and then takes Saul's crown and his sword and a couple other things and takes it to David and hands it to him and lets David know that I killed Saul for you. Well, David wouldn't even kill Saul. David had the opportunity to kill Saul several times and wouldn't do it because he says, I'm not going to lay my hands on God's anointed. And Saul had been anointed by the prophet as God's king, the first king of Israel. He was the first one. You know how they picked him?
How's that? Dartboard?
He was the tallest.
Really?
Yeah, he was the tallest. He didn't even want to be the king. He was a mule herder and didn't even want to be king. They picked him because he was tallest. And like power does, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he got absolutely corrupted. Anyway, he was trying to kill David. Even David wouldn't kill him. And when David found out that this guy had actually killed Saul, he said, how dare you touch the Lord's anointed? And David killed him, not for bringing him the message, but because he had touched God's anointed. So they really used the wrong thing here. I don't know if anybody on the jury knew that.
Yeah, I don't know that.
And Gary might have explained it to him during final argument. I can't remember. But sometimes the messenger needs to be killed, especially if that messenger is bearing tidings of his own wrongdoing.
Right, I get you.
And that's what Charles Duncan did here. So, but Boyder, only the second witness in the 12-day trial, was the first prosecution witness at Feazell's bribery and racketeering trial in Austin in 1987.
Right.
Feazell was acquitted after a 6-week trial, after which several jurors said they thought Feazell had been framed.
Dun, dun, dun.
Several jurors said they thought Feazell had been framed. Now, when I got back to Waco, the Waco legal community, the Russ Hunt, and some of those that didn't like me, and we've talked about Russ Hunt before too. So they said, well, the government just didn't prove their case.
Right.
They just weren't able to say beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty, blah, blah, blah. No, man. The jurors said it was obvious to them that the government had tried to frame me. I think everybody listening knows what that term means, frame me. Put together a false case. Yeah. Boyder acknowledged that he and Bill Johnston, former legal advisor to the Waco police, gave Duncan news tips about cases that Feazell's office had not prosecuted, but did not say that he was under an investigation. And we've already seen that list, Jonathan, and nothing on that list panned out.
Nothing. Oh, man. So much effort to take you down.
I know.
So much wasted energy.
And so much of my criminal trial, Jonathan, centered around, arguments, not so much in front of the jury because the judge wouldn't let us put this in front of the jury. Yeah. Gary and I finally got it in front of the jury by being threatened with contempt numerous times. However, Boyder said that neither he nor Johnston, now an assistant U.S. attorney, we talked about that too. That was Johnston's reward for turning on me. They told Duncan that the FBI had been investigating. No, this is Duncan talking. Said that they told him that the FBI had been investigating me since the fall of '84.
Right.
That's what Duncan testified to. And Boyder said he had a very open. Boyder said that's not true. He never told Duncan that. Boyder said he had a very open and friendly relationship with Feazell and his staff until December 1984. Now, if I were under investigation, if there were rumors I was taking bribes, would me and the right-hand man to Colonel Jim Adams have had a very open and friendly relationship?
He wouldn't have.
No, he wouldn't have had anything to do with me. And he'd have been writing memos back to Jim Adams about me. And well, and that guy we're investigating, he's about to look at Lucas.
Right.
And that didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen.
Border said he had a very open and friendly relationship with Feazell and his staff until December 1984, when former prosecutor Ned Butler told him of Feazell's plans for a grand jury investigation of Lucas's murder confessions in the 3 McLennan County homicides. McLennan County Sheriff's Department Deputy Truman Simons had developed a strong suspect in a Belle Meade murder case that had him set to take a polygraph test when Lucas confessed to the Belle Meade killing. And Borders said Simon's suspect would not cooperate in the investigation after that.
Right. Those are Dorothy Collins, right?
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, Border testified that he told Butler, all right, now let's talk about this. You might want to insert here some more of the KRZI interview with Prince and Captain Mitchell.
I don't see how he could be very critical of us due to the fact that he has never contacted any member of the Texas Department of Public Safety. That is, any member of the task force or the task force employees, supervisors. And that covers from my position all the way through Colonel Jim Adams, our director. So far as we're concerned, his allegations are totally unfounded.
Well, Feazell never came to see us. Well, he didn't visit the task force. He never went to see Colonel Adams. And now we're having to take all this bad publicity. Wham, 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 wham. Let me read you what Ron Border says.
Okay.
Border testified that he told Butler not to tell DPS Chief Jim Adams of the impending grand jury investigation because he would, quote, sweep it under the rug. Now, he'd said that. He said that to Butler and to me, and now he admitted it on the stand.
Thanks for doing that, man.
Yeah, so cry me a river, Bob Prince. Cry me a river, Mitchell. Cry me a river, all of you guys. Well, he didn't come to us. Well, the very guy that was y'all assigned to investigate me told me not to go to you. So if you've got an issue with that, go find Ron Border. Drag him out in the yard and have a talk with him. Because he's the one who said that your Fuhrer, Colonel Jim Adams, would sweep it under the rug, which is exactly what he tried to do.
Right.
And see, and also at this time, I mentioned before, Border was really sucking up to us because he was getting close to retirement back then. Well, he didn't retire because he stayed on to investigate me. He wanted a job with my office. He had talked to Ned Butler and Truman both about coming to work for my office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he said, don't take this to... Now, he denied that on the stand. He totally denied that. But he admitted that he told us not to go to Jim Adams and that he told us Adams would sweep it under the rug. He told Butler to take it instead to Attorney General Jim Maddox.
Right. Well, no, let me back up, though, Vic, because you did eventually take it to Jim Adams, though.
I did.
That's what pissed him off and started this whole thing.
Well, I thought that he started investigating me that day.
Right.
But that was before I refreshed my memory with this article. Border said he reported Feazell's plans to DPS supervisors. Well, that's the same as reporting it to Jim Adams. And to Texas Ranger Bob Prince, a longtime Border friend and a member of the Texas Ranger Task Force that supervised Lucas.
Right.
Now, next paragraph. This is the one that just knocks my socks off, Jonathan. The same day, now this is all from Border's sworn testimony in court. The same day that Border told Adams of the Lucas grand jury plans, January 3rd, 1985. Because, see, I didn't go visit with Adams until maybe May. And that's when he pointed his nubby little finger at me and said, but I am investigating you. Right. All right. Well, he had started investigating me on January 3rd, 1985. The same day that Border told Adams of the Lucas grand jury plans. January 3rd, 1985. Adams assigned Border full time to checking allegations that a handful of Waco attorneys were charging high fees to get cases dropped by Feazell's office, which is the exact same language that their media puppet, Charles Duncan, was using.
Right.
And this is how they generated their public outcry to get the FBI involved.
Boom.
Because they were not involved until Duncan got involved and started the public outcry. Now, I remember they came to town for a little while. Bob Zane did. And I was hearing, God, the FBI is looking at you. And then they left. But that was because there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. And the Justice Department has a policy that if they go in and investigate a public official and they can't find something pretty quick, they shut it down unless there's a public outcry.
Right.
Well, Jim Adams goes, I can get the public outcry. Yeah, he knew how this stuff worked. Remember, he had been director of the domestic spy program under J. Edgar Hoover.
Exactly how it works.
So Adams assigned Ron Border full-time checking allegations against Feazell. In other testimony Wednesday, Richardson played a taped telephone conversation between Duncan and former Waco City manager David Smith. I told you we were going to start dropping names. Former Waco City manager David Smith. Duncan tried to convince Smith to go on camera to talk about Feazell that day and to release police records to him. Smith told him that the city attorney had advised him and other city leaders not to be taped by Channel 8 and said, if this thing doesn't come to a good head or a good conclusion, we still got to deal with him, meaning me. They did go on camera, though, even though their city attorney had told them not to. Well, you know, they did. They did. But the police chief and David Smith, the city manager. Duncan told Smith later in the conversation, of course, I think our parting this is going to have an overall effect, whether the feds are successful or not. So here's Duncan saying, I think what I'm doing will have an effect over whether the feds are successful or not.
Right.
So that's the feds, that's Jim Adams using Duncan as an investigative arm, as a law enforcement arm, to get out there and spread disinformation. Disinformation, intimidation, isolation.
That's it.
That's their three prongs, and they were doing it all to me. Duncan goes on to say, I think at least the public will know all the details of what's going on. I mean, in a very clear-cut manner. I mean, we're going to lay it out over 5 or 6 or 7 different nights, different segments. And in that amount of time, you can certainly tell a lot about the story. And I think the public is going to be well aware, without any doubt, even some of his closest friends who may not even be aware of what's going on will have a clear-cut idea of what the problems are, Duncan told Smith.
Wow.
So Duncan is telling Smith, I got the power to turn even this guy's closest friends against him. I got one more thing here. Smith and former Waco Police Chief Larry Scott both appeared in the segment of the Duncan series.
Right.
So there you have it.
And you and Larry Scott, the police chief, you guys did not get along at all. Because
No, we didn't.
you were saying basically they would send you all these cases that were BS, right? And you wouldn't prosecute them. You'd be like, that's a nonsense case. We're not going to do that.
That's true. They would send me these BS cases where people's Fourth Amendment rights had been violated, sometimes where they had been physically abused. I remember one case where a man was beaten with a nightstick in the face so bad he spent a week in the hospital. They didn't know if he was going to live. And that cop got away with it.
Right.
Now, we'll have to break because we've been going a while. But when we come back, there's another police officer that refutes Duncan's testimony. And then we're going to get to my buddy, Judge Walter Smith. And by then we will have relocated Gary Richardson's cross-examination of Judge Walter Smith. And when I think about Judge Walter Smith, it reminds me of one of my favorite Doc Holliday quotes, which is, if I thought you weren't my friend anymore, I just don't think I could bear it. Doc Holliday. He was being facetious, and so am I. No, I'm glad Smith's not my friend. My friends are a lot higher quality, a lot higher caliber. And I don't have a friend yet who's been driven from office for sexual misconduct. Yeah. Smith was. But he's getting full salary. Hi, I'm Vic Feazell. During these trying times, you might want to just stay home. And at the law offices of Vic Feazell, we understand. That's why we're set up to handle your personal injury claim without you even having to come in. Just give us a call, and we'll take it from there. We can send any paperwork straight to your smartphone or computer. Don't delay, because if we don't put money in your pocket, you don't owe us anything. I'm Vic Feazell.